Good morning, or afternoon, actually. I'm Christine Radarski. I'm your Rochester and Monroe County historian and also the Director of Historical Services here at the library. And with our speaker today, Rebecca Edwards, one of the co-editors of Rochester History Journal. So we're delighted to have you here today to join us for the launch of the most recent issue of the journal and to hear Rebecca's talk about the work that she's put into this wonderful article. If you're not already a subscriber to the journal, please think about joining us. There's information on the back table and a QR code so that you can continue to read the wonderful work that we're doing in the journal. Today, Rebecca Edwards will be talking about building deaf spaces in 19th century New York State. And I'm delighted to be able to introduce Rebecca, who is a professor of history at the Rochester Institute of Technology. Her latest book with the co-author Eric Nystrom is called Ordinary Lives, Recovering Deaf Social History Through the American Census. It was published just last year in 2024, and I know at least one of our audience members has a copy with him here today, so we're delighted to see that. We are live streaming this program on YouTube, and so welcome to anyone joining us online. And we have two interpreters with us today, Beth and Wanye. Did I pronounce that correctly? Okay, thank you. So thank you both for being with us today. One last housekeeping thing. If you need a restroom, they are to my left, you're right over here. You can either exit through the rear and come around, or you can exit through the door that says staff only and go through. You will not be able to come back in that way, though, so you'll need to come around. So, with no further ado, I would like to introduce Rebecca Edwards.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming out here today. I appreciate it so much. This project comes out of a longstanding interest of mine. So my interest in deaf history goes all the way back to my college days. It's a long story. I came here to Rochester to go to graduate school. Ooh. I'm gonna jump up. I'm trying to make sure people can see on Zoom. Get stairs on this side. All right, Zoomers.
Thank you.
Good. Excellent. As I said, I came here to go to graduate school. So I came here to Rochester, where I went to the University of Rochester. I knew when I came here that Rochester was home to the country's largest per capita deaf population, because everybody knows that. I knew that there was a large community of ASL users here. I was always told that the reason for that was the presence of NTID. Of course, is the National Technical Institute for the Deaf. It welcomed its first students in 1968. And yes, clearly the presence of NTID did grow the deaf community here in Rochester. You had deaf students and deaf instructors and deaf staff and deaf faculty members and deaf alumni, many of whom then never left, right? They came to NTID to go to school, then they stayed here, which relatable as a person who came here to go to school and then also never left. So I get that. This explanation was really, really satisfying as far as it went, but it always left me wondering how much deeper Rochester's deaf history went. And so that got me thinking long thoughts about the Rochester School for the Deaf, which you can see here. This is a more current image. There's the school back in the day when it was founded in 1876. The Rochester School was founded at a pivotal moment in deaf history, of course, because that's the late 19th century. So we're in this transitional moment. Deaf education had always operated on the manual method, that is teaching deaf children through sign language. Here in the late 19th century, we are moving towards teaching deaf children instead through speech, through lip reading, and then in turn banning the sign language method of teaching that comes to be known as the oral method. RSD's moment of founding is like literally straddles that transition. Which you can see here. This is an image of a speech class at the Rochester School. The school described itself at the time in the late 19th century as effectively being an oral school. It described itself as a school that used, quote, the manual oral method. Talk about like splitting the difference, being a little bit of both. Yes, the manual oral method. So here you can see blurrily, it's like he's hiding from us. He is the man in the middle on the top stairs standing with the large white beard and the hat. Yeah, that is Alexander Graham Bell.
I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
Yeah, that is Alexander Graham Bell. That is Bell. Bell, the inventor of the telephone, that's how many people remember him. He wanted to be remembered as the man who championed the oral method, right? Who was going to make deaf people over in a hearing image by teaching them how to act like hearing people. So he comes to the Rochester School, that is him visiting here, throwing his support behind the school. The school was also at that time using one of the newest techniques to try to teach deaf children in Rochester how to speak. Here you can see a cover image of the book, The Lion Phonetic Manual. Oop. Oh,
It's a little bit
sorry.
dark. Can you?
I cannot. We're asking for lighting up here to make this more visible. We're going to wait and see. The image is too dark. So we need like lesser lights. Yeah. Yeah, I don't have anything up here, I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem.
We got, this book is not very fascinating anyway. The point of this book is that the line phonetic method was invented here in Rochester. I couldn't get an interior shot. Edmund Lyon invented a system of symbolizing speech sounds with hand movements. So as you spoke, you were supposed to add these hand movements. They were clues to the deaf student watching about what they were supposed to do with their tongue and with their lips in order to properly produce a sound. This was a method that Bell loved, and that's partly what brought him here to the Rochester School. So it's very much in an oral school mode when it is founded. This method doesn't actually work. This whole Lyon's phonetic thing, that's why none of you have ever heard of it. What you all remember, of course, is the Rochester method, which many people in this room are familiar with. It was the teaching method of the school, where sign language is forbidden. There's not supposed to be any use of American Sign Language, and instead it's English only. Right? Effectively, this is oralism with fingerspelling. Right? The only acceptable language is the English language, and we will fingerspell it to you all the time. So that would be like me standing here and spelling my lecture to you. I'm just going to stop now. But that's the idea, right? That's this. This is the Rochester method. All right. And again, this was good as an explanation as far as it went, like how so many deaf people come to be in Rochester. But my area of interest as a historian particularly is the antebellum period. So pre-Civil War, when all deaf education was manual and there were no oppressive oralists running around telling deaf people to act more hearing. That's the time period I'm interested in, and that's where I wanted to get to know more of. What did deaf Rochester look like then? Because there have always been deaf people in our communities, right? It's just that they don't show up often enough in our histories, which is, I think, a really crucial distinction, which makes deaf people a lot like many other minority groups and marginalized groups. They've always been there. It's just that we don't talk about them. They're overlooked in our histories. Ironically, I think we don't help ourselves here locally in the community when we all say that deaf history is here in Rochester because of NTID, because now we mean to be amplifying deaf stories, right, and shining a light and telling that story by saying, here we have deaf people, here we have a deaf university, and that's why we have a big deaf population today. And it's not that NTID is an important part of the story. Of course, it is a big, important part of the story. But if that's where we think the story begins, we're just still making deaf people in the Rochester's deep past completely invisible while we think we're helping. So that's partly what brought me to do the work that you're seeing today. That's my motivation. But here we now have a problem, for me. There is no school in Rochester until the late 19th century for deaf people. So in order to find deaf people in Rochester, you have to know that they're deaf, right? We're dealing with old historical records. There's a problem with that. A lot of old historical records don't make a note of a person's audiological status. So I might be finding deaf people in, for instance, the Rochester city directories, but I don't know that they're deaf people. So again, it looks like there's not any deaf people. So in order to break in, I guess, to that and try to see if I can get a key to open that door, I turn to here. This is an image of the New York School for the Deaf. This is back when it was located in Manhattan. This school was, for a long time, the primary school in the state serving a deaf population. I can give you a brief number to help tell you how many people this school is reaching. So in the 1860 census, there were 344 people recorded at the school. 296 of those were pupils, 18 were faculty members, and 26 were staff. So we're not talking about a huge number of people. School was always about this size too, roughly 270 to 300 students in any given year. But their records, we know that those are deaf people, right? So now we have a name, we know that they're deaf, and now I have a master list, right? If I can find them at the school, then I can try to see where did they go after they graduate. And if we're lucky, maybe some of them came here to Rochester. It's a lot of luck, but sometimes you get lucky. Other important thing to know about the New York School, not only is it serving, of course, deaf students, the New York School is integrated. Doesn't serve ever a very large number of black, deaf students, but my point is black, deaf students were allowed to attend alongside white students. It was never racially segregated. The New York School opened in 1818, and there was a young black, deaf boy in that very first class in 1818, and a black, deaf girl came to the school the next year in 1819. They have the same education, the same teachers, the same sign language, because there aren't that many black, deaf students at any one time. There's no evidence that they are segregated from the white students. We don't have enough teachers or students to do that. Everybody goes to the same classroom. Everybody goes to school together. Everybody lives in the same dorm together. Okay. That eventually led me to a student by the name of Joseph DeHart. Joseph DeHart was a black, deaf student. He's a native New Yorker, and he attends the New York School from 1845 until 1852. So many questions that I had about him when I bumped into him. What was it like, right? What's it like to be one of the few black, deaf students going to school with all white peers? How was he treated? What were his interactions like with his teachers? What were his interactions like with his classmates, with his peers? Was he accepted? Did he make friends? Unfortunately, I'm just going to put you all out of your misery right now and tell you, I don't know. I don't know. We don't have anything from him directly. I don't have a diary. I don't have letters. I have nothing that he wrote that would tell me that, which is very irritating. So I'm inviting all of you to try to answer those questions with me by looking together at what I do have, and then you can tell me what you think. All right, so he graduates, right? It's 1852. He's still in New York City. The next place I find him in the records is actually here. This is an image of New York University. He doesn't attend New York University as a student, but this is early days for the New York University. It turns out NYU was home to a church for deaf people. I still don't even know if NYU knows that. I keep meaning to ask if they know anything about how important they are to deaf history, and I just keep forgetting to contact them. NYU was home to, in 1852, a chapel that a hearing reverend of deaf parents, Thomas Gallaudet, was using to offer sign language masses and services to deaf New Yorkers. And while the church was still at NYU, Joseph DeHart shows up there. It's like the first record I find him in. He is the last on the list here. Yep. This is the record, the handwritten records of the church. Or they keep track of everyone who's attended, baptisms, confirmations, which is what you see here. It's a list of 6 all deaf people, as it notes, being confirmed together on the 12th of June, 1853, at the chapel of New York University. And there is Joseph DeHart. It turns out most of the other deaf people on that list with him were people he had gone to school with. So I know that those were some of his classmates. In other words, here we have him graduating, and now the first moment to find him in a record after he leaves school is finding him with his classmates, still in New York, and attending this brand new, right, still very young brand new deaf institution, one of the earliest for the emerging deaf community in New York. So it's a clue, right? It's a hint of how included he felt, how welcome he felt. But I will admit, it is still only a clue. This is about the last moment they're here at NYU. They finally raised enough money to get their own church, and you see it, the building pictured here, St. Anne's Church. St. Anne's still exists today, by the way. It does no longer look like this. It is not in this building anymore. But the church as a congregation, it still exists. All right. Next, we enter a period of a bit of silence in the records, right? Because it's 1852. We don't have a census coming in New York State until 1855. So now I have a big hole, right? What is happening with him? I don't know. I can tell you what's happening in New York City, and it's not good. Conditions in New York for Black Americans really deteriorate in New York. That's because you have the Fugitive Slave Act is passed. You have people who are aggressively pursuing Black people throughout the city, and they're not actually that particular about who they take back. They're getting paid, right, to produce a body, and any Black body will do. So things are getting dangerous. And so you see in the 1850s a lot of Black Americans who start noticeably fleeing New York. They start trying to move to rural locations, and this is mostly the reason why. Does Joseph DeHart know about that? Maybe, probably, likely, but I can't tell you that he knows about that for sure. It raises the question, of course, of where would he go? Even if he knew, like, bad things are happening, right, what would be his exit? This is an unusual exit strategy, but we'll get there. This is a notice that ran in a Brooklyn newspaper about a marriage of two deaf people. It was held at the New York School. It's Nehemiah Wilkins of Brooklyn. And he is marrying L.A. Frisbee. Her first name is Louisa. You can tell that deaf marriages are still so unusual that the newspaper writes about how the sign language was used for the marriage ceremony, right? They're like, wow, we don't know that. That's cool for them, right? So that's interesting. Well, it turns out these two are marrying in the summer of 1852. She was 39. This is her second marriage. Nehemiah was 21. And Nehemiah had gone to school with Joseph DeHart. They were together there at the exact same time. In 1855, now we had the census coming out. Yay. So I can look for a Joseph DeHart in the census in New York State. He appears here. This is the farm of Nehemiah Denton. He shows up in Geneva, New York. So as I said, many Black Americans were leaving New York City for rural areas, and it turns out Joseph DeHart is actually one of them. He gets out of the city and he gets himself to Geneva with the Dentons. He is the only deaf employee on the property in 1855. It raises a lot of questions for me as a historian, and again, not sure how far I can go to answer them for any of us today. Are they friends? Or was he friends with Nehemiah? I want to say it feels like he's friends, right? Both, he's the only deaf person who comes to the farm, who gets a job, and Nehemiah went to school with a lot of other deaf men. None of them ever show up here. None of them ever get jobs at the farm. Only Joseph. I don't know is the answer. I don't know. But it's, again, something for all of us to think about. So here he is in 1855. Joseph DeHart will end up staying here through the entirety of the 1860s and into the 1870s. I don't know, we can say maybe he's just a really good employee, but again, I wonder if there was more to their relationship than that. But they're not the only deaf people in Geneva. This is F.M. Tuttle, who you see here in this image. He's a painter. He and his wife, Eunice, are both deaf. They had also both attended the New York School. They married in the city, and then in 1865 moved back to Geneva, to Tuttle's mother's home, which is where they were all living together. The Tuttle house is 1.5 miles from the Denton farm. So it boggles the imagination to think that these people did not know each other. They're living 1 mile-ish away. They all knew each other. Okay. Joseph DeHart next appears in a record in a census in New York State here. He is now living with the Tuttles, and he is working for them as a servant. And a little bit of speculation on my part, but he got a better job, he's getting older, he's not working as a farm laborer anymore, now he's going to be a servant. This is kind of what I'm imagining. Because this is what Tuttle spends his time doing. He's a painter. So this is one of his paintings. This is the painting that's going to get us from Geneva to Rochester. So this painting is one of Tuttle's most famous works. It's depicting an old biblical scene. It was displayed in a gallery here downtown in 1885. I will take no credit whatsoever for this part of the story. A very intrepid deaf researcher named Diana Gutierrez was determined to find out whatever happened to this painting. It took her a while, but she did. She eventually tracked this painting down. It turns out it was acquired out of this gallery in downtown Rochester around 1885 by the superintendent of the Rochester School for the Deaf, who bought it because he knew that the artist was deaf, and he wanted it to be on display to inspire the students. Right, here's what you can do. It hung in the superintendent's office at the Rochester School from 1885 until 1943. And then finally, when a new superintendent came in, he decided this painting was way too old-fashioned. Right, Bible scenes, they're not cool in 1943, and it just struck him as this old-fashioned art. Why is this here? And they put it into storage, which is pretty much where it stayed until Diana went looking for it, and they recovered it in 2012. Finally, you pull out the right crate, and you're like, oh, here it is, the painting. Yeah, wow. All right, but the story gets better. From our point of view, it turns out Joseph DeHart was already living here by then. Joseph DeHart had moved to Rochester at least by 1879, so I find him in a city directory. He came because of his connection again with the Dentons. This is Nehemiah and Louisa's daughter. This is obviously a picture of her as a much older woman. He came here, Joseph DeHart came here with her when she was a newlywed. She got married in 1879, and she and her new husband, William Gorsley, moved here together to Rochester. Joseph DeHart moved with them. He lived in their household as a coachman, so he was driving their carriage for them. This is the moment that really gets a little bit weird for me as a historian who's doing deaf history and who also lives in the city of Rochester. I eventually realized Joseph DeHart and I are separated by decades and decades and decades of time, but 1 mile of distance, because the Gormsley house is 1 mile from my current address. So that was a little bit weird. I'm living in Joseph DeHart's neighborhood, and I didn't even know it. They were here living in Rochester. She will turn out to have deep connection still into the Rochester deaf community. She will join the board of the Rochester School for the Deaf in 1904. and she serves on the board for many years. So there's also a story here about codas in their place and how they remain active in deaf community as well. This is the part in my own research where I was feeling, I'm not going to lie, I was feeling pretty cocky. Like, we have a story, we don't have the whole story, but it felt good to be able to trace him all the way out of New York City, up here to Rochester, that he knows other deaf people who are also living in Rochester. There's more even deaf people that they know and who are living here that you just have to read the article. It's too much to get into. But there's a bigger deaf community here, and he's in the thick of it. And I felt pretty good about being able to bring him back into the story until the story took a really terrible twist. This is a map of Cayuga County. This is Senate, New York, and it's hard to read, but in the bottom corner to the left, you see a dot that says poorhouse. This is a map showing where the poorhouse is located, and unfortunately in 1890, Joseph DeHart is on the registration rolls for this poorhouse. It's 1890, he's admitted at the age of 55. He claims to be seeking this refuge because of illness. He's no longer able to work. And he will die there on the grounds on the 29th of March, 1892. Here, I really had to confess I have only questions and no answers. I don't know how he ended up here. I will say he is not the only deaf person I find in the records who end up in poorhouses. And it's not due to his race either. The other people that I found who were deaf and in poorhouses in the same decade in the 1890s are all of them white people. It's also not uncommon for anybody who becomes old and infirm and can't work in the late 19th century to end up in a poorhouse. We have no other social safety nets at the time, right? If you don't have family who can take you in, you're on the street or in a poorhouse. So it's a sad story to be sure, but it is also not uncommon a story. But why does this happen to him? But that's the question I can't answer. How does he specifically end up here in this position? How does his life, which I had been feeling pretty good about, it seemed settled and included, and then it just completely falls apart here at the end. He is buried here as well. The poorhouse had an associated cemetery. That cemetery, of course, because you're living in a poorhouse, it's just a potter's field with a number as a headstone. So I have not yet been able to figure out which number precisely is his, but he is buried there. So I leave all of us with the questions we can all think about. What do we make of all of this? What is the meaning of his experience? What is going on with him and the Dentons? Are they friends together? Their deafness is what brings them together. It's why they're all in school together. Their sign language is what brings them together. They all can communicate easily with one another. But he is also a black man and they are white people. What does that mean at that time? Are they working across those lines, against those lines? I don't know. All I can tell you is what I have told you. That we can find deaf people here in Rochester, deep back into the 1840s, and they're never not here. So deaf history in Rochester has been in Rochester since the very beginnings of Rochester, and helping to recover those stories and bring them forward is part of why I wrote this article. Thank you so much for coming and thinking about these things with me. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Questions? I'm happy to take questions. Do we have a question right away? Yeah.
About DeHart, why a poorhouse so far away from Rochester?
I don't know. I know. We did have a poorhouse.
Their burials in Mount
Monroe, and they buried him Mount Hope. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that either. Like I said, it's the joy of doing this kind of work to me the fun of trying to recover these people and tell their stories and try to do right by them, but it's the frustration of doing this work too. I don't know how he ended up there. I know only because it's clearly him. I mean, he has to fill in paperwork, and he writes Joseph DeHart, gives his birth date, which I know is the year he was born, talks about his deafness on the form. I know it's him. Why is he not in the Monroe County poorhouse? I don't know. See, that's another great question. Yeah.
I wanted to clarify, which courthouse, where is that located?
This is Cayuga. And again, I don't know.
Is the building still there?
I don't think so. The property is still there. Like I've seen pictures of the land. This is outside of Senate. Yeah, this is another, like, I keep meaning to drive there just so that I can kind of put eyes on it. I wish I could tell you why. Like, I felt a little bit nervous coming to tell this story because it has like a lot of loose ends. Right, but then I thought it just does have a lot of loose ends. Like, that's the way this research goes. So we'll just have to, yeah.
I have an interesting story to research about a deaf couple from Geneva. Apparently they died, and the housekeeper got the money and changed the will a little last minute, it seemed, because of a big argument related to that. There's a rich woman that you see there was a daughter who was against, like, support, and it won. And both of, like, the money from the couple, the girls seemed like they were hearing people were trying to steal some of their money, it seemed like. And further back, the grandfather was really wealthy and developed from Brooklyn,
Yes.
New York.
Yes.
And the property sold the building of the Brooklyn Bridge.
Yeah, the Dentons, thank you for that. The Denton backstory is quite the story. The Dentons were Nehemiah's people. The Dentons were really wealthy. They were from Brooklyn. His grandfather, Nehemiah Denton is named for his grandfather, who's also Nehemiah Denton. And the grandfather, very wealthy, very prosperous, big name in Brooklyn, big landowner in Brooklyn. So he came from a deep pockets, big, wealthy family. Yeah, that's a fascinating story too. His story is interesting as well, Nehemiah Denton, the junior story.
On one of the censuses in the late 19th century or early 20th, there is a column for disability.
Yes.
Have you ever explored that, whether it's an access to deaf people?
Well, actually, it's funny you asked that question. Yes, so that's been I brought my copy with me. That is actually the topic of my latest book with my co-author Eric Nystrom. We explore that very census. It's the 1880 census. The 1880 census is fantastic for that very reason, because it made a huge effort to really identify deaf people and get more information about them. So the census form, where you just have, the names of people in the household, they were supposed to check off if they were deaf or not. But then if they checked off that the person was deaf, they were then supposed to, at the door, produce a second form and ask that person for more information. So they sometimes would record if that person went to school for the deaf, where they went to a school for the deaf, so you can get all kinds of really good details out of that census. So my co-author and I went off to try to do more with that.
And the title of that one?
The title of this is Ordinary Lives. I have the hardcover, but there's paperback too, so don't feel like you have to get that. And I should add, the DeHart story originally appeared in the book, but the version that you all have now in Rochester History Journal, there's actually more. There's stuff in this article that's not in the book, because I was determined to try to track down a few more things and did. So this is the more up-to-date version of the Joseph DeHart story, the latest and greatest, so to speak. Yes.
Looks like you did research to track back to the New York School for the Deaf.
Mm-hmm.
Did you also do any, like, backtracking to the American School for the Deaf in Connecticut?
Yes, so there's a lot of American school stories in here. Yes, the American school also was racially integrated. So that is partly actually what got both my co-author and I first kind of deeply attracted to this. And we both realized what you can do with the amount of the stuff that the census recorded. But then you could also realize there's Black deaf students at both of those schools. And that was intriguing to both of us as historians. You know, we too often imagine schools for the deaf in the 19th century as white-only spaces. And there are years, sure, where there's no Black students that happen to be enrolled. But there's never, those are few and far apart. There's always, through most of the 19th century, 1, 2, 3. The high point in the New York school, I think they had 6 Black deaf students going at a time, which, particularly when you think of the hearing schools in those years, where the number of students going to school together across race lines would have been 0. The deaf education was doing something really different. And so, yeah, we got kind of into the story of both of those schools through the lens of race. And then this was supposed to be an article. I'll just say that. Like, we'll write an article about that. And then, I'd find something, and my co-author would find something, and then finally we had to sit down with ourselves and go, what are we really doing here? And decided that it was, in fact, a book. We were lying to ourselves. But yeah, tons of stories about the American school in there, too. Yes?
The guy deaf at the Deaf Church in New York,
Mm-hmm.
New York University, is that related to why Gallaudet in Washington is called that?
That's a good question. So actually, it all goes back to the American School for the Deaf, which is in Hartford. Yep.
The Gallaudet at New York University Church, is that related in any way to the reason Gallaudet College is named what it is?
Yeah, it's all kind of related. So the co-founder of the American School in Hartford, Connecticut, that you were just talking about, the co-founders of that school were Laurent Clair, who was a deaf man, and Thomas Gallaudet, who's a hearing man. So Thomas has a son, confusingly also named Thomas. Thomas, the son, goes off to found what will become St. Anne's Church. So he also will be building, deaf-related spaces. His other son, Edward, will be hired as the first president of what becomes Gallaudet University. To be clear, in fairness to Edward, because he had to answer this question a lot, he didn't name the university after himself, right? He didn't call it, and it shall be Gallaudet University for me. No. He named it for his father. So technically, it's named for Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet. It's not named for Edward, but Edward is, in fact, the president who puts the Gallaudet name on the university. You're welcome. Can I? Oh, yes.
I have a question.
Sure.
The Philadelphia School for the Deaf, it was in Philadelphia, right? It was
Yep.
in the city of Philadelphia.
It was in the city, yep. Mhm.
All the Black students were in the town, right? There was a large population you know about
Yeah.
that situation?
No, and the Philadelphia School for the Deaf, well, the Pennsylvania School for Deaf in Philadelphia, I should say, some of their graduates appear in the book. We do capture a few of those students. I do not believe the school itself was racially integrated at the time. They were slower to bring in students of color. So the two earliest schools, the oldest schools for the deaf in the country, are the American School in Hartford and the New York School in New York City. And both of them were racially integrated. Pennsylvania School is founded third, and they are not. I have not been able to get a completely straight answer out of their records with when they started integrating. So there are only white students who are coming, white deaf students who are coming out of that school. And we do, in the book, we do bump into a few of their alumni. So there are some stories of graduates of the Pennsylvania School in the book, but they are all of them, they're white students.
I don't want to give away too much about your book, but in the early part, you talk about Hartford, Connecticut signs, not
Yeah.
sign language. And then you talk about this cohort of graduates who amongst themselves give birth to ASL as we know it
Right.
today. And I know your book is not a linguistic research thing. It just, when I saw these two terms come in, you like, okay, Hartford signs, that's
Yeah.
ASL, but then these graduates go off and make it be ASL.
Yeah.
Like, how do you build that bridge?
Yeah, that's a great question. There, I'm sort of tapping into some of the latest linguistic research, and I'm not a linguist, but myself by training. But you can't be writing about this topic without paying attention to those issues, obviously. And so that's the latest thinking, that linguists who are working on that early 19th century period at the American School have started calling, let's say, like that first 10 years, right, which things are just starting to come together, as really Hartford Sign Language, because you only would have had it if you went to Hartford, if you went there, right? So like they were like, what are we calling it American, like for? Like the reach isn't that far, right? So then they're like, all right, let's start with that. We have to think of it as Hartford. If you were there at that time, you would have known it. But then, yeah, somehow we have to get from that to the American Sign Language that we have. And the theorizing that they're doing now is how much of that kind of linguistic work was really done by the students themselves, and how much of it was also done by their younger siblings. So this is the new thinking, right? In other words, if I'm the older sibling and I'm deaf, but I have younger siblings who are also deaf, I go off to school first because I'm the oldest, right? So I go to Hartford and I start learning these new Hartford signs, but then I take them home. And now I'm introducing them, right, to my younger siblings. And then sometimes my younger siblings are going, well, that's cool. And then they start using it, and then maybe they suddenly innovate something. And then I go, oh, that works so much better. And then I take that back home and I go back to school to Hartford. And then I bust something out and everyone goes, well, where'd you get that from? And they're like, well, my younger sister went, we should do it like this. And everybody goes, yes. Right, and then repeat every summer vacation. Right, everybody goes back to home, everybody comes back to school, everybody goes back, everybody comes back. And so by the time some of those youngest siblings show up, they're already signing the language, because now they've been doing it at home all this time. And that's sort of the moment when you kind of take the leap from it's a Hartford phenomenon to it's an American phenomenon. Which I think is like the coolest thing like I've ever heard. So it's wild. But it also is how come then, why then finding all of the people you can find is so important, because they're they're literally creating the community and the language. And like, who are those people and where are those people and what is their story? That's kind of me and my co-author, that's then kind of our end of the thing more than the language. Oh, we had more hands come up. I'm going to go around the horn. Go ahead.
Are the early schools tax supported or are they privately supported? And second question, have you found annual reports for the schools whose educated story?
Schools have a ton of annual reports. They are very helpful. And the short answer is both. They were privately supported, they were state supported, there's like a mashup of funding, and it was an effort to try to get as many students access as they could, right? So if you're really wealthy, good, you can pay your own tuition. If you're paying your own tuition, the state can put its money into paying the tuition for poor students. And then everybody can go to school together. So that...
Another example of integration that's good.
Yes, that's an excellent point too. But there's how you get to the Nehemiah Denton story, as you mentioned. His family is wealthy. His grandfather was like a big deal in Brooklyn. But he's going to school with children from much poorer backgrounds at the New York school because that was the goal, was to try to get access for more people. Yeah, it's an excellent point. Let me have, you had a hand, so then did you have a hand too? Yeah, go ahead.
I just had a question from the American School for the Deaf that started in 1817.
Yeah.
The primary communication came from around there in French sign language that was brought over. Is that true, or is that like a mix of both time and French sign language, and then when did it kind of classify as ASL
Yeah.
decades later?
Yeah, that's all also part of the mix. A lot of students who came, say you have no deaf siblings, right? So you're alone. As a deaf person in a hearing family, you probably just invented some signs that you and your hearing family agreed upon, right? Those are the home signs. So yeah, you would show up at school with those. Laurent Claire, who's of course our co-founder of the school, is deaf and French. So his sign language, of course, is French Sign Language. Yeah, and that's like literally in the mix too. Patty is talking about Martha's Vineyard Sign Language. The number of deaf students who came to the school from Martha's Vineyard. Martha's Vineyard had its own separate sign language. It was not linguistically related to French Sign Language, and it's actually, there's a big argument about what it is related to now, which I won't get into. But anyway, it's the thing that they signed on Martha's Vineyard. Those students came and added those signs to the mix. Yeah. But I think the path still is the one that the current group of linguists outlining is still correct, that all of those things come together into what they're thinking of as a Hartford phenomenon. And then somehow we have to make the leap from this being a language people understand in the middle of Connecticut to being a language that people can understand across the country. But yeah, it has a lot of chefs in that kitchen, linguistically speaking. Right? There's a lot of elements that go into it. Karina, do you have a question? You're patient back there.
Thank you for sharing your research. And I'm interested in the Black community and the records. How do we know about the Black community and the records of the deaf students?
So in the New York school and the American school, both those schools keep excellent records, particularly the American school. The American school actually keeps these huge, oversized volumes that are the intake papers, and they just meticulously have these handwritten, like student number 1, and then they just handwrite who it is, everything about them, their parents' names, where they came from, some details, on to student number 2. And in those volumes, every student of color is identified. So the white students are not, like no one writes white, their race is just assumed. But if they're black, they write black. This is 19th century. Sometimes they wrote colored. They had a couple of students who were from native tribes. Sometimes the name of their tribe is noted. So that's how you can find them. So be confident of who they are, right? Of their racial identity. And then you have to cross-check. So as I was looking, going back to here, I was really happy, right, that this confirmation record lists Joseph DeHart, and there's his name, and then it writes next to him colored. So we can, which I already knew that he was a black deaf student, but then I was like, oh, okay, so now I know, right, that this is the right person. So yeah, sometimes it's like that. It's a little bit of needle in a haystack. Other times, I will say though, he might appear, like he does appear, for instance, in the city directories of Rochester. DeHart, comma, Joseph. But the city directories don't list anybody's race. So I have to already know that to know that. Does that make that as I'm sorry, that's a terrible sentence. That didn't make any sense. I said I already have to know that to know that. That is, I already had to know that he is black and deaf to know that that's a black deaf man in the city directory. Like the directory isn't going to tell me that. So yeah, finding the first documentation that lets me as a researcher have confidence that this is who this is what then lets me run around and try to follow him in these other records. But those school records are like literally everything. They're practically the key to the whole story. I worry about them every day. Like if anything were to happen to those records, it's a nerdy thing to worry about, but if we lost them, we would be lost. We'd lose the key, right? That's the key, yeah. Luck. Yeah, luck. That was luck. I have no life. This is because I spend like a lot of time on Ancestry. So if you go to like ancestry.com, right? They must, like their analytics must think I have the craziest family history because I'm researching all of these random names all the time. They're like, would you like to know more about your uncle? I'm like, okay, none of these men I'm searching for are my uncle, but thanks, AI. Yeah, so I do searches periodically for Joseph DeHart to see if anything new pops up. You try different approaches. It's like idiotic, right? Try different approaches, try to spoof the thing into finding new things for you. And one time, just how I asked, I don't even know why, I just suddenly got lucky, and this intake form pulled up. It's better to be lucky than good. That's the short answer. Yes, in the back.
Just sitting here and taking everything as a researcher, and just some of the gaps in what you're finding. Some of your work intended to inform future categorization or capturing better data going forward.
Yeah, some of it is, that's a great question. Some of it is definitely that. The hope of having a place to start, which then may point you to where else to look. As we've already talked about, the fact that he ends up in this poorhouse in Cuyahoga County, like, should I be going down there and looking for more information, right? That kind of thing. I would never have thought to have done that, except that he ends up in a poorhouse there. But okay, so now maybe I need to pay more attention. Things like that. It might help for newspapers. That is a real shot in the dark. Does this person appear in a newspaper? Is there an article? At least if you have a place and a time period, that's maybe you get lucky. Yeah, as much. Yeah, I think of it as there's a puzzle out there. Right? And so every piece you can get helps to try to give a more complete picture. Does that make sense? But of course, maybe there is no puzzle out there, and I'm just, I think this is all we have. That could be the answer too.
You mentioned the Native Americans, and I had not understood that. I think they think the Native American sign was actually used among Native American tribes where there were enough deaf people to communicate with each other. I understood it was linguist, like with
Yeah.
intertribal communication, but I didn't know about that first. Have you ever read about that?
Yeah, there's not a lot of early years linguistic presence, like at the American school, of sign borrowing from native tribes specifically. The linguists I know who are working on that haven't found a lot of that yet. There is evidence of schools in the West that open encountering more of that. There's some evidence of that then trickling its way back. But like those first years in Hartford, like think 1817, 1818, 1819, yeah, we don't see that then.
I guess I'm also just plain interested that there was enough
Very.
communication among tribal members in sign.
That is mysterious too, like how many who, like tracing it out, in other words, like what you're asking, the real making those specific on the ground connections as opposed to general level data. Like we know that these signs were in use and we know where, but like getting into the nitty gritty of how they passed literally from one hand to another and who was in that chain. Yeah, there are people who are doing that, who are looking at that.
Yeah, that's going to be terribly difficult because there's no written language.
Well, and there's that problem, but also like tracing people into a school directly. Like I know the New York school, because he was there, I don't know, like maybe within 10 years of when Nehemiah Denton and Joseph DeHart were in school, there was a student named David Hill who was a member of the Onondaga tribe. And so he's listed in their records as an Onondagan. And he comes to the school and attends, and then he goes back because I found him in the 1880 census doing the research for this, and he goes back and he's living with his people, and he's running a farm too, because the 1880 census also had these huge farm agricultural registries, and so you get all kinds of chapter and verse on how big his farm was, how many animals he owned, you get a lot of stuff. Yeah, but he's just the one that comes to mind off the top of my head. Did he go back and live with any deaf people there? No. Like the rest of his life, he's living with hearing people. Did those hearing people sign? I don't know. Now we're back into like how those kind of questions, right? Like how invested were the hearing people in your life, right? If you are my hearing parents and you sent me to leave the tribe and to go to school and I know this language now and I come home, do you use it too? There's like the paper records can't, they can't show us that. There's just limits. So which means there are limits to what I can talk about, which is why I kind of feel a little bit bad. Because I don't want to like raise expectations too high. Like, oh, we can learn all this stuff. We can, but then there's some things that are just always, we can't really know. But we need letters for that. Or diaries, right? We need that. We need somebody writing down something that talks about those things. And I bumped into a few. They're very exciting, but not many, and not any of these people, unfortunately. Nothing from these folks. Yeah.
I guess I'm just curious, and I know you said you're not a linguist,
No.
but if you were able to find anything specifically about the language used, like what they were signing,
Yes.
the region that they were in.
Yep.
A lot of indigenous people, there's a lot of black people. Like, how are they using the language with each other, and when they're mingling with people outside of their race, how are they communicating? Is there any evidence?
So that's such a good question. The earliest years of the school, the American school I'm most familiar with, that I can tell you about in Connecticut. You had anyone who was a student who attended learned the same language together. So from my point of view as a historian, because I'm most interested in that pre-Civil War period, when we're talking about the emerging, new American Sign Language then, it really is one American Sign Language. Like if you went to school, that's the language you learned. And it travels also with the teachers. There's a lot of the teachers who start at the American school, then get jobs at the New York school, get jobs at the Ohio school, get jobs at Kentucky, right? So they're also spreading, there are a lot of hearing men, of course, but they're also spreading the language with them when they go to teach somewhere else. Yes.
Like I picture like William Stokey, right? Documenting
Right, I'm with you.
the parameters of the language of the language used.
Yes. There is some of that.
People doing that prior, right?
Yes, there is some of that. You sometimes run, it's a great question, you sometimes run across teachers who write about how other teachers need to do better, right? This is a theme through a lot of early 19th century writing, like teachers need to learn the language better from their students because it's a deaf language and you need to learn from them before you can teach. So first there's a lot of that. And second, then those same people who are complaining about how people sign incorrectly go into excruciating detail about how they're screwing up, right? Stop signing like this, don't sign like that. It's hard to describe because it's like very wordy, right? You know what I mean? Like it's using a lot of English words to try to tell you how to produce a sign better. So it can be really confusing, right? Because you just no illustrations, right? It's just so you just have to sit there in your house going, okay, so if I put my left hand here and I'm doing my right hand there, I mean, just oh my God, like it's just hard to. So I don't know how well it actually produces a sign, but I guess on a certain level it doesn't matter. What I admire about it is their commitment to the fact that this is the right way to do it. Like in other words, they're telling us there's a grammatical way to use sign language and there's whatever you people are doing that's totally ungrammatical and you should stop that right away. And I really like that because it tells us that long before we get to 20th century language researchers who make that point, 19th century people already knew an ungrammatical signed sentence when they saw one. To me, that's really exciting. Like as a historian and thinking about deaf people, that's really exciting to me because it means other people are recognizing their language as a real language, right? It's not a real language if there's no way to sign it incorrectly, right? Then anything goes. But if you have a whole bunch of people writing, going, "Hey, knock it off! Don't do that. That's wrong. That's not right." That means there is a right, and it means you all know it. You know it when you see it. That's a language, to your point. That's a language. And there's also a lot of writing, I'll just add this, in those pieces too, about the real problem with hearing people. And then it makes me think, oh my God, hearing people never change. The real problem with hearing people signing is that they think it's just about what they do with their hands. Like a lot of people writing a lot of pieces like facial expression, people, facial expression. You have eyebrows, use them, that kind of stuff. Put your shoulders into it, that kind of. It's like, oh, right, so it's like now. It's the same as now. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. This was a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate you all coming out here. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you too, people of Zoom. Appreciate you. Thank you, interpreters.